MMA can get pretty intense, and while players are expected to fight so they can win, sometimes things can get a bit too personal. And of course, when that happens, certain fighters will most certainly lose their cool too. But what happens when they do? And more importantly, why does it even happen in the first place? Stick around until the end as we talk about times when MMA fighters lose control in today's video. First up, UFC fighters try their best not to lose control. So this one's basically a given when it comes to mixed martial arts, but no matter what you do and how many rules you follow, things can get pretty intense in the ring, especially when a combat sport like MMA has the potential to turn into blood sport, regardless of how you look at it. Sure, a large chunk of televising these hyped fights is to sell them, but that too comes with the price of having a couple of hot-headed athletes that bring home the big money checks. But being feral in the ring is not something that's encouraged. In fact, like all sports, the UFC has made active efforts to regulate the sport through the unified rules of MMA. These rules consist of all the things that you're not allowed to do in the UFC, and you'd be surprised how many times athletes have gotten fouls because of them. Stuff like butting in the head, eye gouging of any kind, biting or spitting at an opponent is strictly not allowed in the UFC. You'd think people might have gotten that memo, but trust us when we say that that's not the only thing resulting in penalties. Fish hooking, hair pulling, throat strikes, and groin attacks also make up for a lot of fouls. And ooh, how can we forget flipping the bird? So yeah, things get pretty intense when you're in the ring, so it's not a surprise that some athletes, very rightfully so, lose control. Coming up, let's take a look at the unspoken code of mixed martial arts. As we just talked about, there are certain things in the UFC that are just a big no-no, like you can't even think of clawing, pinching, or twisting flesh, and using abusive language in the fighting arena, yeah, that's definitely going to get you in a lot of trouble. And while the list of things that make up fouls here is endless, let's talk about something that, at its essence, is sort of like an unspoken code in the MMA. For those of you who guessed it, you're right, it's respect. And like all things in life, respect at its core is fundamental in a professional setting, especially when you're an MMA artist. Sure, you've got to be agile and in shape all the time, but if you're not extending some amount of respect to the opponent or the game, then you're pretty much not cut out to be in the ring. And that's exactly why up next in the video, we're going to be talking about a couple of scenarios when players went a little too out of control, causing absolute chaos in the ring. So go get that popcorn as we crack down all the times when MMA fighters lost control. Up next, a sucker punch won't just get you on a player's bad side, it'll also get you banned. Have you ever been sucker punched? If no, then you're probably a lover of peace. And if yes, then all we gotta say is that we feel for you, bud. Because it wasn't just you who had to tolerate those. But back in 2010 at UFC 113, Josh Koscheck went through the same thing. Now, if you recall from what we talked about earlier, there's a lot of stuff that you can't do in the ring. And in case it wasn't clear, sucker punching your opponents is hands down the last thing you ever want to do out there in the ring. But it seems like Paul Daly had no care in the world when he did it, because back then when Daly made a cheap shot against Koscheck, he seemed pretty satisfied with himself. After all, he had finally let out the frustrations he held against Josh for effortlessly rising to the top. Now, as we know, in 2010, Koscheck had basically fought his way to a unanimous decision victory against Daly and was inches away from being a top challenger too, but then came Paul sucker punching Josh from behind, and it wasn't just that one punch that did the deed. He actually would have gotten a couple more punches in had the referee not stepped in to restrain him, but the damage had already been done, and Paul was soon banned from the UFC for going all haywire on Josh. So what do we learn here, guys? Sucker punching, bad. Next, let's talk about why you should never prolong a fight even after your opponent taps out. In case it's not clear, tapping out is also called the submission, and it essentially means that when the MMA fighters are in pain, if they're being held in an arm bar, knee bar, or ankle lock, they can easily get themselves out. All these things sound and are pretty awful to deal with, so most fighters tap the floor or the opponents by hand or foot to signal their opponent or referee that they're surrendering and admitting defeat. So what happens when a player taps out? The chokehold in question should cease immediately. Right? Wrong, because that's so not what happened here. Kamaru Usman is a lot of things. He's an MMA artist, a freestyle wrestler, and a retired folk-style wrestler too. But do you also know what else he is? Someone who was kicked out of the UFC less than 24 hours after his welterweight debut. In 2013, he was removed from the ring after he ignored his opponent's many efforts to tap out, which Usman swiftly ignored. He might be a welterweight kingpin in the UFC now, but back then, he was fueled by a lot of testosterone and rage. Kamaru had successfully trapped Mike Pierce in a deathly leg lock during his bout, and apparently it was so intense that Pierce had tapped out not long after being held in a chokehold. But the Nigerian Nightmare ignored the visible tap that was not only witnessed by the referee, but also the entire audience. audience. In the end, the fight was clearly over, but this wasn't the last time Kamaru went overboard by prematurely celebrating his fights. Moving on, you don't just lose your control over your anger sometimes, it can also be your bowels. Losing control doesn't always have to mean that you're angry. Sure, Paul Daly might have lost control and avenged himself for being envious, and Usman seemed to have lost his cool by what we assume was premature excitement, but sometimes you can lose control over things like your poo. If we're being honest, letting out a loud fart in public is already pretty embarrassing. Sure, it's a natural body process and shouldn't necessarily be something we should be ashamed for, but for the sake of hygiene, it's not something that one really looks forward to when they're out with people. For this UFC fighter, though, things went way beyond more than just a simple fart. Dubbed as one of the greatest nightmares of UFC, Justine Kish apparently went a little too literal with leaving it all on the mat. In a bout against Felice Herrig, the unfortunate fighter ended up defecating all over the place, and by the end of the match, her poop was smeared all across the ring. Was it an episode of Traveler's Diarrhea, or a well-thought-out but admittedly gross strategy to win? Well, turns out it was just your average Valsalva maneuver that led her to expel her own version of manure. See, Herrig had put Kish in a rear naked chokehold, which basically mimicked that said maneuver in question. The positioning of the body basically allows your lungs to expand that push on your diaphragm. The diaphragm in return pushes pressure on your lower abdominal and pelvic areas, and voila, those muscles holding your stools allows your poop to go through. Now that's your take-home science fact of the day. Not to mention, you can also lose control when you're overconfident. Being confident is great, but being overconfident can inflate your ego 10 times over. It's pretty common to lose control in the ring because of a lot of things, but if you're confident and have full faith in yourself and your skill set, then you're pretty much unstoppable. But what happens when you consider yourself a little too unstoppable? Well, Jorge Masvidal might have the answer to that question. Back in 2019, while going up against Ben Askren in the welterweight fight at UFC 239, Masvidal seemed a little too overconfident, almost like he thought he'd already won the fight. Turns out, though, the overconfidence that made Masvidal lose control ended up earning him his UFC record. As soon as their fight started, Jorge landed a flying knee attack on his opponent that knocked Ben out, concluding the match within the first 5 seconds of the bout. Did he lose control, or did he have just the right amount of faith in himself? Well, that's something that we'll leave up to you guys to decide. Last but not least, sometimes all it takes is just an intense stare down to set things on fire. Now this stuff is one for the history books. The beef between John Jones and Daniel Cormier is something that people have hushed in whispers about for years. It's not only personal, but it's physical and emotional. It runs far deeper than your average rivalry and has a long-standing history that started off with a bad first impression. But we're gonna reel it back to a certain August in 2014 when, during a hype event for UFC 178, the two fighters posed for a face-off. At first, things seemed cool, and it just looked like two people having an epic stare-down for the cameras. But oh, how wrong we were, because after that, things took a wild turn, and the intense stare-down translated into Cormier shoving Jones in the throat. The latter lodged his own punch that was missed, but it all turned pretty ugly pretty soon. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, but this just soured the bad blood that already existed between the two. So what else did you learn here, guys? Sometimes all it takes is a stare to lose control, and not the good kind. That's a wrap for this video, you guys. How do you feel about these situations when players lose control? Let us know what you think in the comments section down below. As always, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. Until next time, see you soon.